Hello, my name is Michael Scott, and this is the playtest of Paige Turner. These are some of the bugs and glitches that me and my team have found while playing the game. So without further ado, let's begin.
Find the book, complete the letter. That will make Turner remember.
Okay, so we're going to first start out with the general bugs list. So the game remains clearly unfinished state with only fully completed levels present and controls not told to the player. So when the player begins the game, there is no in-game controls menu or anything like that, or control UI that the player can go to. And unless you read the README file, you essentially have to press all the buttons in order to figure out what each of the keys does. While playtesting the game myself and talking with some of my colleagues, there were one or two controls that even I did not realize until after talking with them. The next thing is the traversal and the map feels real nice. It feels nice to essentially go through the different like movement options that the player has in the game. The next is the smoke particle effects move very nicely, but the style of particles doesn't match the character at all. Also, the character is extremely different from the world around her, which is slightly weird in her office. So I can only chalk that up to uh, the presentation of the character in relation to uh, the objects in the world don't necessarily match up as well, because she's kind of like a um, origami character or origami paper character in like the realistic world. The next is lantern shoots, but the pellets do not, but do nothing in the level. So when you press X and you go into lantern mode, you can press Z to shoot pellets. Those pellets fly, and they do not collide with anything, and they essentially don't do anything that I'm essentially aware of. So that is, yeah, they don't even, yeah, you can't even light the light. Okay, the next bug. Clipping models is abound with some items not having collision. So the most prominent issue for that one, or the one that I see the most, is this book in particular. The player can just immediately clip through it, and unless this is supposed to be a special book, the player is most likely not supposed to be able to clip through it. It's supposed to have collision. The next one is pickups generally seem to do nothing, assumingly they're currently placeholders. Okay, so upon collecting the item, there really isn't any indication as whether the collecting that item actually did anything. I don't even know how many items the player needs to collect. That is some information that is not properly conveyed. So the next bug is bookshelves aren't easy to jump on, sometimes getting caught on edges. So this happens not specifically on bookshelves, but this can happen on like any of the objects. You essentially kind of get stuck in a free fall like state, and it's not to say you can't get out of the free fall state. However, the player isn't supposed to just be like stuck in a free fall state, and that is on most of the objects in the world. the next bug is players sometimes get stuck behind objects. And a example of this would be like the bookshelves, some of the bookshelves and some of the objects. I believe there isn't supposed to be a gap in between the bookshelf and the actual ledge part of the level. And even though that isn't necessarily the biggest issue, that's kind of like a collision thing. Maybe the bookshelves need to be pushed back further so the player can't get somewhat stuck, even though they're open right now, and you can kind of move behind them and they have openings to get out. I don't believe that the player is supposed to be able to jump behind them. And then in an instance like this, you jump behind an object like this, and now you're stuck in free fall. Or I was stuck in free fall, and it is very difficult for the player to actually get out. Okay, let me go back to... Oh, so that was actually another bug, wherein if you restart the level or teleport, it shows you the mouse cursor,
the letter.
and
Turner remember.
the mouse cursor is only supposed to be visible when the player unpauses the menu. But upon reloading the menu, the cursor becomes visible again, and will become uninvisible when you unpause it again. And then the next bug is the audio for the objective for starting each level. The objective is minimum, with only a voice that speaks to you at the beginning of the level that doesn't repeat itself. So whenever you start the level, a voice tells you what the objective is. However, there's no way to repeat the instructions other than restarting the level. So that makes it difficult for the player to get confirmation on whether they're collecting the appropriate amount of items, whether there's no UI to tell you you've collected X many of items, and maybe upon collecting all the items there's a voice that speaks to the player again, but there's no way for the player to get any sort of indication to know that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then lastly, for the general bugs, pickups and enemies don't have any in-game model. Pickups regulated to little green squares, while enemies are some kind of red capsule. So the enemies on the stage, red capsules that can collide with anything. I assume that they're enemies, but there's no real way to get that information. Okay, right there. That green pickup. I assume that they're supposed to be... That's a placeholder for a texture or something of that nature, but not totally 100% sure. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the specific bugs on each level that we found. So in Turner's office, point of area unknown, some type of hub world. So it's a little bit unclear in terms of if this starting area is supposed to be a hub world. If it's supposed to be a starting area, I don't. It's unclear whether what the space is supposed to be doing. Is it supposed to get the character familiarized with the objects, or if there is actually an objective that the player needs to complete? That is a little bit unclear. The next is the 2.5D maze area. So there's one or two issues with this. So first of all, I like that the camera angle goes to a top-down. However, the player can easily just double jump onto the onto the bricks and then bypass the maze altogether. It doesn't make sense for the camera to go to a top-down perspective if the player can just traverse that element altogether. The next issue is that because of the situation where the camera is placed, the player can go out of view of the camera, and the camera just kind of is just locked in place, and the player can't find themselves. So that is definitely an issue. And then the last element is when you are close to the maze and you end up the camera pans out. I don't believe that the camera should be panning out to the maze if the player actually isn't in the maze. That doesn't make any sense in terms of like the direction or the perspective view. It doesn't make any sense if they're not in the actual maze. Okay, so the next one for Paige Turner's office is these white planks. Unsure as to whether they are placeholder objects or if they are as intended, but when you collide with any of the objects in the world, the character transforms from their human, or they transform from the fog form into their human form, and I don't believe that's the way that's supposed to be intended. I assume that the player is supposed to stay in frog form until they actually land, but when the player collides with a object, they will transform into their human form versus stay in their frog form. Okay. With that being said, we're going to move on to the next area, the East Wing.
Find the book. Complete the letter. That will make Turner remember.
So let us start off with the East Wing. It is obvious the effort that is put in this area with even a cutscene to introduce the area as the player enters. So, as you enter the area, and you approach the tree, cutscene, it looks nice. It kind of pans out to the area to kind of give you a feel. The next thing is, after the cutscene ends, the player is thrust into a kill plane, removing one or two of their lives, actively hindering their overall readiness for the level. This hurt zone is not marked well. It isn't a different color, or if it is a different color, it's too similar to the ground. So the area that this issue occurs is this area right here. It is unclear as to whether this is a kill area. I assume that it was snowflakes falling when I played the game, but that really isn't that really isn't displayed properly. So that area could be redone to make that area clearer. And it's a little bit disorienting just constantly dying but not knowing what you're dying to. So this vine area is supposed to be a climbable wall, but it doesn't allow the player to actually climb up the wall. It just has the player slide down. So this is obviously a placeholder for a vine area. However, there's no functionality in the vine area doing what it's at least supposed to be doing. So that is a little bit confusing. So the next bug is it is easy for the player to run to the beginning of the level, or run to the center of the level, and obtain the objective, which is a pickup. However, there's no challenge in terms of collecting the pickup. I assume that the door is supposed to be closed, but that is a little bit unclear in terms of like if that is as intended or not intended. There are multiple kill zones. So I mentioned the very first kill zone, but there are multiple kill zones in the level that are not labeled. There are multiple models that are untextured in this level. So once again, like the first area, those white blocks, I assume that they're supposed to be something versus what they currently are right this second. Without further ado, we're going to move on to the next area, which is the West Wing. Okay, so the West Wing, there were two major bugs that were found. The first is a crash has been reported by the tester seemingly unprompted, as they simply are writing a note while the game was paused. I can't really simulate that. The second is the player can get stuck behind an updraft, which normally pushes them upward. Player had to reload another level to escape. Okay, so this is the area with the updraft. So, as you can see, the updraft is pushing the player into the wall, and I am stuck in freefall, and I cannot move the character or get unstuck from that. And the only way to get out of that is to press escape and go to a different level. Or the same level, it doesn't necessarily matter. And without further ado, we're going to move on to the next area, which is the North Wing. So we are going to start with the bugs on the North Wing. The first of which is the player starts in a featureless box filled with books, eventually being loaded into the level. Collision inside the box is unfinished, causing the player to slightly bounce around inside of it. Supposedly meant to be some kind of elevator, so that's the very first one. There is another updraft issue with the player being essentially stuck. Once a player traverses the books, it is unable for them to actually traverse the books anymore. I don't believe that is as intended. Okay. The next bug is that unaligned textures allow the player to see into the void outside the map. So when you actually go to the you can go through the window in the map, and you can clearly see all the textures of the world. And I do not believe that the player is actually supposed to be able to go through the window. The next bug is that there is another maze on this level. And the maze is very disorientating in order to traverse it. And the reason for that is the fact that in order to go through the maze, you have to shrink yourself. But the way that the top-down camera angle is, it's a little bit difficult in order to like maneuver around the maze while pressing down a button. And that will do it for all of the bug tests in the North Wing. So the last area is the archives.
The candles light your path forward. Venture forth, Ori.
Okay, so there are a few things to note for the bugs in the archives. There are books with obvious effects to denote that they should warn the player to different locations, yet they do not teleport the character when they collide with them. So there are books in the level, these books right here, teleport the player to another book, fine, works as intended. However, there are other books in the level, those books right there, which should teleport the player. However, when the player collides with them, they do not teleport the player. So yeah, so colliding with the book doesn't teleport the player anywhere. Unsure if that is a exit teleporter or if that is an entry teleporter. It looks like it's an entry teleporter. There is a the next bug is there is a missing wall that allows the player to jump out of bounds of the level. So if you take the elevator down, don't necessarily need to take the elevator down. But if you go over here, there is mixing texture from the level or a wall in order to stop the player from actually jumping out of bounds.
The library will make you a path to the book. Follow it.
That is not intended. Also, if the player jumps off of the ledge out of bounds, dialogue will... Well, they'll keep on doing it, and dialogue will keep on repeating.
Venture forth, Ori.
Yeah, if the player jumps off the ledge and they just like repeat, they can get stuck in a loop to constantly have the audio keep on playing. So there is another bug, which is the player can clip through the tree. While playing the map. So if you're in the center of the tree and you just turn your camera angle, the player just magically disappears and you can actually see all the other textures and things of that nature, or the lack of textures. So the player looks essentially invisible right here. So I was incorrect. The bug that I was initially talking about was that the player, while changing the camera angle while the player is inside the tree, disrupts the alignment of the textures on the character and the tree and things of that nature. However, when you are actually inside the tree, you can actually clip through the tree as a player, and you can essentially get stuck sometimes. And that is not as intended. So the next bug for the archives is a collision bug with landing, or is a collision issue with landing on the books. Because of how the books turn, while you're landing on them, the player can essentially just somewhat just like bounce off the books based on how they're turning. Last issue is the last bug is that the note over here seems like it's collectible, but when you try and pick it up, it doesn't do anything. And then there was one more bug that I forgot to talk about, and that is in the north wing. So in the north wing, there is an objective that you're supposed to complete, and the objective has switches. And when the camera angle pans out, when the camera angle pans out to a different perspective, the camera doesn't properly, the way the camera pans out, you're not able to see all the switches that are key to completing the objective. So even though I hit them all, I can't see a third switch from this perspective, and I don't even see the character from that perspective. And without further ado, that is the end of our playtest.